Hello all, Game Methuselah, or James Francis Joseph Xavier Murphy if you'd like. This could be an interesting video for me. I'm not sure how well I'm going to do at it because I've been giving it a lot of thought and I kind of didn't understand it for the longest time. While doing videos, people kept asking me questions on how I run my game tactically. And they were asking, I guess, for the way I move the monsters and whatever. And over the years, a lot of people have said I seem to be really good at DMing, especially DMing the battles. I've done some monster wrangling for Matt Colville and other DMs, and it's something that we were involved with many decades ago in my original game group, because we would always try to get the newer players who had not game mastered before to do so. And we would always say, look, we'll help you. We can run the rules and the mechanics, and we can wrangle the monsters and run the battles. So all you have to do is basically lay out your story. And it worked really well. We had some fantastic games from people who would have never wanted to be game masters, who came out and did that because they felt comfortable that we would help them wrangle their adventures. And in doing so, they made some creative adventures that were excellent. And some of them turned out to then enjoy wrangling their own monsters and became just fabulous game masters for their own and produced great stories and ran great battles and great encounters very much on their own. But I kept sort of dwelling on this, and people keep asking this question, and it was somehow like I didn't understand it until one person recently asked me the question. He said, look, I have a lot of experienced gamers and experienced role players in my group, and I'm not. And I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And I said, well, something that has been successful for us, as I just said, something that Matt Colville has used very well, and I've wrangled for him, is get your players to run the encounters. Most of them who, as you say, know better than you, can do a nice job of wrangling your adventure combats, and you can just run out the story. You can keep track of the hit points, you can even cast the spells or all the basics, but you let them move the monsters. And we have found over time that what you would think doesn't happen. The gamers are not going to sandbag the monsters. Often they tend to run them substantially more aggressively than you would. And that makes for an easy way to transition to the game. So if you're new, don't be afraid of this. Ask other players who are more experienced, who are in your game, to help you. But let me give you some basic philosophy, and I think that's where it's going to help the most. My basic philosophy on role-playing is it's not a board game. It's not a miniature game. It's not a storytelling game per se, even though it is. It's cooperative storytelling. But if you play aggressively as a DM and you try to win, you have lost the game. The secret of being a great GM is to lose with panache, both in your combats and in your storyline. It's easy to basically come up with a very tough adventure. I mean, we always talk about all the DMs when we get together. It's easy to kill player character, but what does that solve? It gains nothing, it builds no game, there is no adventure. And as I had mentioned to a man recently, who now feels badly that he said something, that he thought my games might only be combat-oriented and not story-oriented, and did I agree? And I think his name is Jesse, so I'll really out him there. And I said I did not agree. I said, to me, both are equally important, both the story and the combat, because it is a combat-based war game, and it is a cooperative storytelling game. Those are both equally important. But what I always find the most important thing is the drama, as I have mentioned. And the drama is the hard part. How to elicit drama and not make it either cheesy, which is tough, or too hard for the players to understand, which is also tough, or it's just too good to pass up. You don't want to be that DM, and I think this is an early failure for some Dungeon Masters. A lot of my friends who were DMs, who are now great DMs, started out sort of in the same problem. Don't be the round peg in the square hole, where you've got this fabulous story you've laid out. You've drawn maps, you have cities, you have towns, you have everything, and you've laid it out. And as the players do stuff that you totally didn't expect, and they change the parameter of your game, you're forced to kind of like go, well, what do I do? So you try to stuff that peg into the square hole that they don't fit into. And what happens is you're running the game and you're playing the game, and both of those are not going to work together. As my friend Kevin once said, if the only way we can win your game is your way, there's no point in us playing. And that's true. So being a DM requires a level of flexibility. The other thing is, you don't have to win, like I said. In fact, you don't want to win. And if you're a new game master, the best thing to remember about that is just that. You don't have to make your encounters tough. Throw tons of crummy stuff at people. Let them have lots of little fights, which they win dramatically. Well, it's okay. Early on in the campaign, they gain experience. There's not really a whole lot of treasure at low level, so it's not like they're going to overbalance the game. But the thing is, you're going to learn what works and what doesn't. More importantly, you're going to learn how the party you're playing with works. Now, if you're playing in one where it changes every week, obviously it's much more difficult. But if you have a set group that meets once a week and you got you and 5 friends, it's not going to take you long to know where the skill level is, what their characters do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that you can play to the level of their strength. In my Albion 4th edition game we ran last year, Mark showed up with a pacifist cleric, and I went, Yahoo, thank you very much, because I had 5 highly skilled, very well knowledgeable, aggressive players who know how to play the game and know how to take advantage of the system. So I knew once you threw that pacifist cleric in there, I could just jam up my encounter levels so that they could have exciting and dramatic battles all the time. The storyline continues the same, it can be interesting, but all the challenges get to be substantially tougher. And it worked brilliantly. And they're very sharp. They could buy into them. They could take advantage of things that most other people wouldn't. They knew what to fight, what to run from, which was great. And it became a really nice campaign. I sadly lost Matt Colville through the start of it because he was just too darn busy with doing all of his stuff, but that's the way the game goes. But for you, I always suggest someone, when you're playing a module, or maybe a module campaign, or as they're doing now, which I think is really neat, they make these whole campaign books that sort of go from start to finish. So if you start the campaign book and you keep playing it, by the end you've acquired an entire campaign, and it works good. But in amongst that, add your own adventures, bring in your own stuff. I think doing your own campaign is great, but at least doing your own missions and your own little side adventures or little side heroics or rescue missions or whatever it is that you're excited about doing, it makes it your game. So whatever module you're playing, it wasn't just the old stodgy module, it was your module. Pick the way you want it to be. The other thing I tell people when they first start running, have the monsters run away. Now this is a great thing to do when you're a low-level DM. When you're new to the game and you don't know, just throw a bunch of kobolds and goblins in there. As many as you can paint. 20, 30, whatever. It's a little goblin lair, and they go in there and they fight and they fight and they fight. At some point, 2 things will happen. Either you've realized, oops, you've overestimated the strength of your party and they're in trouble. Or B, they're going to start wiping these creatures out. But they're still going to be at risk. What you want to do in this situation is the monsters run away. Now, you don't have to necessarily fudge die rolls. This is really easy. Once the kobolds lose a bunch of kobolds, as I said, they don't necessarily like a fair fight. They're going to run from a fair fight. So they have a chance to bail. The characters get all the experience and the treasure and the fact that they're bad, and you've learned all these vital lessons in how to wrangle your monsters. What works in a tactical combat for this creature or that creature or some other creature? Do you dodge? Do you attack? Do you disengage and flee away and fire arrows and try to delay? There's so many different things you can do in a battle, and you'll learn these for what works. But remember, it's not a matter of it's the same tactic for every creature. Every creature should have its own motivation. I mean, they have their own little goblin lives and little goblin wives and kids at home, and they want to survive and go home. But some creatures, like your undeads and alike, will just fight to the very last, so it becomes a very different combat. The other thing to do is always come up with like a minor bad guy to start with. Doesn't have to be powerful, it can just come along. Maybe he'll just be something that runs away. I think I've told you one of my most famous bad guys who stalked adventurers for years was just a goblin that ran away from an early encounter and then just kept coming back to harass the party all through their adventuring in my campaign. It's all up to you. But the thing about tactics is it doesn't require you to be worried about it. Just run it. Some encounters are going to be great. Some encounters are going to be mediocre. Some are going to be deadly and really interesting. And you're not always going to know. Now, later you will. Some you can really understand. I mean, a great experience that happened many decades ago is Don Hawthorne had painted this giant ogre miniature that had come out. It was twice as big as almost any miniature that was on the market at the time. Really large. And he had it hidden and he was painting it and painting it and painting it and painting it. And he was so excited about it. And we came out and we ran through the adventure, and at the very end, of course, Ogsbog the ogre leaps out to get us. And Pan throws a sling ball with her hobbit rogue and criticals it, hits it into the head, and knocks it out. It falls off the parapet, down the giant pit, and dies. That was the big encounter. Now, I don't know what Don was going to do. He sat there just completely dumbfounded and horrified. It was like all this work he had put into this fabulous battle and this big outcome and how it was going to be dramatic ended with a sling ball to the head, knocking him out, and ending the combat. Now, it was cool for us. We were excited. And that's kind of the point. It was still a super successful adventure. It was real fun. And I will tell you the funny thing. 30 years later, we still talk about it. You know, you're not knowing how it's always going to go. And that's what makes it fun, because it's a cooperative game. Some players are going to drive the games into places you did not expect. In my group, they'll always drive you into places they did not expect. But that makes it good. It keeps you on your feet. It allows you to adapt what you're doing and then make it part and parcel of how the adventure goes. And things will change. If you've seen Matt Koval's interview of me or a lot of things I've talked about, it happens all the time. Going off the rails is really, really good. And being a minimalist game master, this is what I think you guys should all do. Sit down with the Dungeon Master's Guide and generate a bunch of creatures that you really like. Ones that you have painted miniatures for was always the way I did it. I'd paint miniatures, I'd then make up a whole little band of monsters based upon what I painted. And I'd have it in my box that I could pull it out whenever I needed it and was ready to go. And then come out with 4 or 5 or 6 little bad guys of levels somewhere around wherever your party is at the time. And a little motivation for them. And you can make this up, but now in a lot of these new modules and guilds, things that are coming out, and the DMGs and stuff, they have little charts for motivation. So you can actually just roll randomly and it'll give you a motivation in case you can't think of one on yourself. But you might pull these out. They make a right turn, they travel in the woods. You go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Well, okay, I have some little beast men, and I have this evil druid. And you put them together as an encounter, and that's a random event, and you fight and fight and fight, and if the party drives him off, he runs away with his survivors, and now he hates the party. And this is the bad guy. He stalks them. He does things. He does all these little things for you in your venture. It's all part of driving your story. And that's the secret. It's the driving the story, driving the drama. The encounters are the tools you use. Whether they're exciting, whether they're unbalanced, whether they're super dangerous and the party is risking death at every moment, it doesn't necessarily matter as much, except basing it upon what your players like. If your players are scared, like my wife, she doesn't really want to have encounters. So if I play a game for her, I tend to just run a very story-based encounter where she miraculously convinces all these creatures to do what she wants. Or she comes up with some story to, as she says, Shanghai my campaign and change the parameters, which is brilliant. And it's really, really, as I tell her, excellent role-playing. This is how it is. You're making the game your own and changing it with the items you come up with. Now, I have a feeling I'm going to have to do a lot of this series and keep doing these over and over to answer questions and to fill in holes and to give you more things so that you can make this very easy for yourself. When you're dealing with the rules, you don't necessarily know how they're going to factor in. And that you'll learn the more you do. So if I tell you anything, err to the middle. You know, you don't have to err to the top until you understand what you're doing. If your adventures are a little boring, make things tougher. If they're lacking interest in your players, throw something in. Find some motivation. Well, what's your backstory of your character? If they've given you one, then add that into your story. Like I said, I think Matt Mercer does that brilliantly in his Critical Role, where he's always adding the backstories his characters made up and making it part of the main story. Well, that's great. Your betrothed, who you thought was killed by a monster years ago, is not. She's being held by some evil priest off in the distant realm, and you have to build a party to go rescue her. It's easy. You get them to drive the story. Every game they run, can I talk this NPC into joining me on my quest? You keep adding to your story. Let the players drive it. They'll definitely do it, but give them the breadcrumbs all along to move through your campaign. As far as running the tactics are easy. It seems daunting, but it's not. You can be bad. You'll get better. If you want to be good immediately, like you said, find somebody in your group who you've been running with who's maybe the old DM and say, hey, do me a favor, wrangle my monsters. He knows how to do it because he's been doing it. He'll do it, and you'll have a good game, and it will get better. Now, this is a great way to start. I'll leave you with this. Think about it. Questions, come back and ask me. I'll try to get many as answered. And then we'll try to put those questions together and put out some kind of an other compilation of things to help you along the way. It's a hard thing to do because it's hard to get in the mind, and that's what we're talking about. It's easy to draw a map. It's easy to write the stats for creatures and put it down. It's a lot harder when you have to start thinking about what's going on in your campaign, what's going on in your individual adventures, and what's going on with your players to keep them engaged and excited about the game. And then when one dies, how do you re-engage them? They've just lost the character that was their engagement. Oh my God, this is horrible. This is a lot of problems that I think the more recent role players are having. The thing is, the next character come along has a personal drive to deal with something like that. Liam of Keys was a great example for me. There's so many things you can add to make the game more engaging. Think about it, look at it, listen to what I said, take what you like, because that's how you learn. You get my good stuff and you keep that and you make it part of your tenet of gaming. The rest of the junk I throw out there, you don't need. It maybe doesn't fit with your group or it just doesn't fit with you. So you can sweep that aside and add what you want. But eventually what you'll have is a fabulous campaign of your very own that you created, and your players are going to love it. And I think that's going to work for you. So until I get a chance to do another one of these or some other video, fight me, devils, fight. For as you know, my grandmother and I both hate peace. Game on.